Buenas noches, muchísimas gracias por estar con nosotros y es un honor estar aquí con Nataliya Gumenyuk. Natalia, thank you so much for being with us tonight. Es una periodista fantástica, no solamente es una de las grandes periodistas ucranianas, sino también ha dedicado su trabajo no solamente a investigar, a reportear, a contarnos lo que pasa en Ucrania, sino también ayudar a investigar y a crear casos sobre crímenes de guerra, pensando que el periodismo puede ir mucho más allá en esta labor de informar, sino construir también casos que puedan llevarse a los tribunales internacionales y también crear memoria en lo que pueda ser esta guerra, que es la más dura que hemos vivido, especialmente en el mundo occidental y en Europa, después de la Segunda Guerra Mundial. Natalia, I want to start talking about from 24 of 2022 when the war started. You were a journalist. You already created this laboratory of journalism for interest for public, and also you were doing many things with the TV channel. But that day, how did you decide very soon to start researching for war crimes? How did you create, among other journalists, Reckoning Project? And explain what it is, please.
So first of all, I'm absolutely privileged to be that. It's an honor to speak in front of you. I'm foreign news correspondent in my heart. I covered a lot of countries, but I never been to Colombia, and I always dreamt to come to do the story. So it's not really something I'm very happy today, is that I'm coming here because the war is my country and I'm telling that story. But that's the reality. Nobody is protected of the war. This war was unprovoked. And I want you to think about the war. I know in this country, a lot of people would understand what the conflict is. But the audience and the journalism, I want to think about it like, do you remember when COVID started? Can you walk away from COVID? Can you separate your life and what is around? Would you be the one not affected? You would be. But it doesn't mean you don't do your journalistic job all of a sudden differently. So for us, and somewhere from I'm coming for many years in journalism in different positions, I'm really driven by the idea that journalism is a service. It's something you can do. We are there with the tools, especially in the world when people say the truth is subjective, it might not exist, to verify, to find the truth, to go to the place. So we can do something useful, and especially when the war started. You can be really useful. As I said during the COVID, you can tell from your reporting, people would know which road is safe. Can they leave the town? Maybe they should not. Where to go? Also, this story about atrocities, it's indeed, it brings attention, it makes people care and, take the decisions. But my story is a story about covering human rights violations everywhere globally, but since 2014 in Ukraine, in the Donbas, in Crimea. So I was definitely not alone. In Ukraine, we were already engaged in the tools and were thinking how we make sense of these horrible stories. Because we also think that if you really look at the human rights violation and just as something horrible, as something inevitable, it makes you powerless. So what you need to do, you really need to understand that there are people who are committing these crimes. There are people responsible. And maybe there is one civilized way to deal with that, is justice and accountability. I won't say that I have this thinking during the first day of the war. It was too chaotic. We worked 24/7. But also we were working with the colleagues on all these difficult issues. And we also talked to the international colleagues. I had the great colleagues who are from Syria. We had the American veteran reporter Janine Di Giovanni, who covered the wars in the Balkans, in Syria. And her grievance was that what journalists do often, coming as the first respondents to the field, it cannot be used in the courts. It's very important, but sometimes we are the only one who talk to that survivors, to that victims. So therefore, we were really within the first days thinking what we can do and how we can do the stories which would matter later, including, by the way, in the moment when all the big media would leave. They didn't leave by now. They left later, some of them, but it was our thinking. So we started to document war crimes, to tell the stories, but also for a number of reasons: to preserve truth, to bring justice, but also to preserve memory. Because being in this continent for some time, we'll talk about that later, for the last months, I understand. If you do not record truth in a proper way, it would be create a chaos in years. It might politicize, it may kind of society to fight regarding that after the decades. So I really thinking that for us, it's also very important.
Did you use the tools of journalism, the tools of reporting, the tools of interviewing, just to collect and build these cases? And we are talking about thousands of cases. We are talking about 126,000 cases of war crimes now in Ukraine. I think your organization has documented around 400, probably more. But how to use these tools of journalism, why they are useful, and which are the challenge and the problems that you have find in the way?
Today is the biggest problem, I think, for all of us, journalists covering difficult things, is this what people say compassion fatigue. You know, in the law, we now work with the lawyers. The more similar attacks are, the more people die, the more, kind of, you see the pattern, the more often they happen, the more evidence is, the stronger the case. In journalism, the more similar crimes happen, the more people die in them, the more often they happen, there are less chances they would be in the news. We're actually trying to combine both. And this is the biggest challenge. In fact, abundance of the war crimes makes it kind of normalized. People stop to care anywhere, including in Ukraine. So that probably would be the biggest challenge. But what we really do, I just would not to get too much into that, we talk to within this particular project, because we do a lot of other things as well, we speak just to the direct survivors and witnesses of the war crimes, the people who can potentially speak in the court. And their testimonies, are very detailed. So sometimes you really need to ask very difficult questions, not just were you tortured, like what happened to you. And by the way, I would explain that what we do, we're speaking in, especially to preserve the truth, we're speaking in a very neutral way. We're Ukrainian reporters, but we never would ask the question like, and what did Russians did to you? We would say, what happened to you this day? Who were these people? How did they look like? So we won't do that. But we need to ask, but how exactly you were tortured? What method they used? But it also helps journalism a lot, because maybe otherwise I won't dare to ask that nuanced questions, and we wouldn't understand that people in Ukraine during the Russian occupation are tortured or electrocuted in a very similar way, in the north, in the south, in the east, in Bucha, but later in southern regions of Ukraine. So it's really not about like a couple of misconduct of some crazy guy who got nuts, but it's about the system. But also this way of telling, so out of that, we do summaries, analytical summaries, which also are very neutral, very clear, compared to the journalistic transcript, which can kind of be pages, which can be passed to lawyers, to the analysts, to international organizations like various committee of UN, OSCE, all these type of organizations, and also later to the Ukrainian prosecutors, in case, with the consent of the people, of course. We do films out of this. We do documentaries. We mainly wrote articles for the major international papers, The Atlantic, Vanity Fair, some of them in New York, Time magazine, but also later some European magazines, Ukrainian, of course, as well. This year, I'm very happy we started to work more with other places globally. We, publish our stories in Infobae, elsewhere. But, these nuances are also helps, because sometimes we're very short with the people. I give you example. We had the story, an obvious story for the journalist. 360 people were kept in the basement in one of the villages in the north of Kiev, Yahidne, for 1 month. In the school basement, 360 people, in a very small place, suffocating place. Some elderly people died. It was extremely humiliating. They couldn't go to toilet properly. They rarely could go outside to breathe, in the evening. And by the way, that place symbolizes for me what freedom is not. And I asked one lady later, that was a school, and I needed to ask these very specific questions about hygiene. Like, did they, allow you to go to toilet? And you know what she said? That they were in the school. It's a village school. She said, when we asked for the toilet paper, they said they were given them books. And I needed to ask, and what was that? And she said, it was very specific. There were many paper in that place, but they given us the books of Ukrainian language and Ukrainian history, just that one, for using as a toilet paper. It's important for the court, but it's important for the story, and it's important about understanding the war, these kind of tiny questions.
Thank you so much. You built one case among these 400 cases that you have documented. There is one case that you have built it up, writing 70 pages, that you brought to Argentina. That it is this relation from Ukraine is so far away. You come to Latin America, to Buenos Aires, to a federal court. You bring these guys from Ukraine, and you give the court this case that you have documented. Why, and why Argentina, and who is this guy?
For very pragmatic people in Ukraine, I would always explain that, Argentina has universal jurisdiction in constitution. But I start with something else. We need help. We came for help. Because you mentioned these hundreds crimes, and most of the crimes would be investigated in Ukraine. That's by the national prosecutors. Now there are 6 arrest warrants by International Criminal Court, including for the leadership of Russia. But International Criminal Court overall would take just a couple of those cases. Maybe there would be a dozen, not more. So we really thought that we need to use all the venues of justice globally. And I'm very honest. I don't expect from a lot of countries in this region financial help, military help. I know it won't happen. But you have the unfortunate history from which we are ready to learn. So Argentina, of course, has better than me, this story of the trials against juntas, and very progressive legislation, where also there is a specific stress on the crimes of tortures and execution. That's why our lawyers, I give a credit first of all for them, the team, they're international, as I earlier mentioned, some of them are Syrian, decided that if we would go for universal jurisdiction case, and universal jurisdiction case, it's when the crimes happened, is so bad, it's like crime against humanity, that it can be investigated elsewhere. So there are numbers of countries globally who can do that. But for us, it was also important to say that the crime of torture, this crime, it's not the Eastern European crime. We really wanted to show that, if it may be in the really relevant jurisdiction where people understand what it is, what it means, and where they have a capable prosecutors, and there are, other cases, why we shouldn't, we want to come there. Because also I understand that now while here, I understand it's actually a lot of people understand what's going on in Ukraine. But, we also want to fight this crime of denial, to say like, it doesn't happen. No, it does. And of course, speaking it in different country, in different terrain, gives a bit different legitimacy. So we came there with a Ukrainian survivor, whom, and to be honest, like from there, I really understood. We met, we doing the film about that as well. So he met quite a lot of Argentinian survivors and had very honest conversation with them about their experience. And in the end, the summary was not what our lawyers did, but what he said, that they really inspired him to say that it takes ages to investigate. Yeah, I think, is it working? Yeah. So he was inspired. That was for me the most important, to understand that he understood that this fight is very long, but it's worth it. And I think that was exactly some other things for me to understand.
We are going to listen a lot of personal stories tonight when our colleagues from El País will come to the stage. But I want to know why this guy, who is this guy, what happened to this guy, why it was so important for you as a journalist and investigator, this case?
So first, I'll give a credit to the lawyers again, because I think they articulated very well. We didn't take for some grandiose, big political thing or something. We wanted to say that one crime is bad enough. But to be honest, like, we are a rather small team in Ukraine, but within these years, we collected out of like 400 testimonies, over 150 is the cases of tortures. 150. Over 30, 40 of them are about electrocution by the very similar way. So he is representative, that I would also say. Of course, we looked at where the evidence is the strongest, because journalists, I should say, the lawyers, and that's something I understand, they are not selecting the case because the crimes is the worst. There is always the chance that the most tragic story won't be in the court, because it's all about where the evidence is. So in this regard, also there was a criteria. But we also wanted to see the person who is willing to go to this trip and to stay long, who is kind of motivated, because we didn't want to be the ones who pushing him. And he's like that. But for me, why he was also very here, see, he's just a regular guy, we don't name him. He lived a normal life. He said he had never seen tortures or something like that. Like, he really, when he was saying that, like, it's for the first time in his life he understood how horrible people can be, about what they were doing. He wouldn't understand that. But by the way, he also said that in his cell where he was, he's seen the worst of the people, but he also saw the best of the people who were caring about each other, who became like a family members, helping each other. But what we also understood, that most of the victims, especially men, they usually underestimate and undermine their suffering. They usually say, mine is not the worst. Why me? I think there should be people who live, they have this feeling like, I don't want to be on the spotlight because, there are maybe more important stories. Mine is not important. And for us, it was also important to tell him, no, your story is important. But then he kind of understood that. And, he understood it in his way, especially after talking to his other survivors, that he said, like, I can do that. If I can do that, probably I should do that.
There is something that sometimes we forget. This war didn't start in 2022. This war started in 2014. And these journalists like Nataliya, many Ukrainian journalists have been documented, not just the crimes, they have been telling their story, and they have been conserving the memory, creating and collecting these cases and the testimonies of the people who have been suffering from the war. Nataliya, you have been working in the In Crimea, especially since 2014, you were going every year to Crimea to report what was going. And even if already Crimea was was already in control of Russia, tell us about this work that you were doing before 2022, and why was important, and how it's changed, and what makes different now.
Um, Also, I remember I was reporting the occupation of Crimea from the first day. And, but I remember one very vocal story at the very early stage of the war. I came to the village. It was already occupied. So I had experience of working in different places. So I was the one who would go undercover. Also, it's my country. I speak the language. I can be there, so nobody would understand who I am. So I was in the village. And at the time, there were a lot of rumors that not rumors. The Russia tries to justify their, invasion, but also they try to explain people that it would be very good without Ukraine. But Crimea is really heavily dependent geographically by the Ukrainian water. They needed the water from Ukraine. The river flows there. There is no way. And I remember there were two neighbors in the village. It's just some months after the occupation. And they were arguing, and one was saying, but I don't worry about this water thing, because there is an underground lake in our village. And the guy would say, but there is no underground lake in our village. It's not. It's just not. Why? Why? And I thought, like, what a crazy thing. How people can speak like that. It's just really, what is the reality when people challenge this fact? I think now, in 2024, in this world we are now, I think it's like, people can tell anything, and we are not surprised any longer by that. I think Crimea was for long of us warning. We recorded human rights violations, pressure against indigenous population, Muslim Crimean Tatars. But also for me, it was very important to tell the story of the normal people, because about what's going on with their families, with everything. But what is striking for me now, for 8 years, I've been covering Crimea from the human rights perspective. Why this guy was in the prison, how his family is suffering. Also for me, it was very shocking to see that I met one of the first family of the Crimean Tatars who were detained being accused of extremists, because they used two types of accusation. If you're political, you would be extremist. If you're religious, you will be terrorist. There were 5 of them. I met them. I talked. I was shocked. Then they organized some organization where the kids of the political prisoners would give some money, would receive some fellowship, and there would be some help for them, the Crimean Tatars themselves. I came in half a year to the room, and there were 25 of these kids. But I came in a year, there were 50 of these kids. And I came in the year, there were 130 or 150 of these kids, But again, so it's a human rights point. But when the war started, the full-scale invasion started, I understood that, we can't just put it just human rights, because by the moment Crimea was occupied, every single voice who could come and say, the tanks are crossing Chongar, the areas, the full kind of Russian armor machine is going to Crimea to invade Ukraine. Anybody who was able to tell that was gone and behind the bars. The Kerch Bridge was not built for the economic reason. And what is very interesting with Crimea? Of course, Russia put a lot of money in that. It was a showcase. So they built a few highways between, you may imagine, a city on the seaside and the capital of the region. But there was no side roads at this highway. So if you live in the village nearby, in the town nearby, it doesn't make sense for you. This road is used just for the tanks and just for the military today. So I think we really need that's why for me, I'm rethinking, how we cannot separate human rights journalism from from that. But something shortly to say. Now, I was talking recently to a man who escaped another part of the Russian occupied territory. And as I said, we're not asking leading questions. But I knew what he would tell me right after, as he was telling about the life in there. Because I followed Crimea, and I knew this law was there. Then that was the moment when they denied people with a Ukrainian passport medical health. Then that's the law they do in order to kick people out. But then he was like listing these laws. So you just understand that all their 8 years of preparation was there to impose these new things very, very fast.
It's 2 years and a half since the wars started. And of course, at the beginning, all the country was united, fighting one enemy, and everyone wanted to fight. Now the reality is different. We have and find people that they don't want to fight. There are problems in the political side. The society start getting used to this war, and the normal problems in a country are coming back to Ukraine. How Ukrainian journalists are dealing with this challenge? How you have to denounce corruption, political problems, why people are not going to fight, and at the same time you have a big enemy in front with a big machine of disinformation. How do you do that?
I remember I've been in Nablus, in Palestine. And I remember talking to quite young theater players who were telling how difficult it is for them to, criticize the local government because there is an occupation and their words may be misused. So I know this, I know this well. But, I'm glad Ukraine is happened to be the very diverse country. We managed what is very important after 2014, somehow to preserve, actually to fight for the democracy, to create independent media. And I think this, especially 8 years after 2014, prepared us for this war, that we have a strong institution, civil society, organization, independent media, independent from the government, strong, those which cannot be, destroyed very fast. And it's true that especially after the full-scale invasion, during the shock, there were not that much self-censorship. It just was so stressful that you really just were focused on the survival. So people didn't really criticize the government much because they given the government the chance as well. But I'm very happy that the first investigations about corruption, including somewhere in the army, appeared a year after. If you go now to the, I think what I did, one of the stories I was trying to do a year after the war, because I was also concerned about, self-censorship, preservation. I went to listen the stand-up comedians. And, that's fun. They make jokes out of everything, out of army, out of tragedy, out of the West, out of themselves, out of the cowards in this country. And I thought whew, good, we are okay. We are okay. I remember how some foreign diplomats returned to the country after some of them were not there and were telling, is this political mess back? Are already you again fighting each other? Because Ukraine was famous for political parties fighting each other. And I said yes, I'm very glad for that. It's actually something I really want. And they said why? Because I said, but that's normal. Because for me, why are you afraid of the political fights? At least in our context. You're afraid that the country would collapse. We didn't during the war, during the full-scale invasion. We managed to differentiate where is the state, issue, where is something to improve. So I think there is a constant fight. It's not perfect. There are investigations. There are problems because when we had the case when security service, financial department was doing surveillance against one of the investigative units. Later, these investigative units made a film about that, which actually humiliated the security service to extent it's possible because everybody laughed in the way how horrible they did, how stupidly they behaved. They were fired. It's very important for us because for me, the problem is not where we are perfect. It's whether you tackle the problem, you speak about it or not.
But the problem for me that people were fired, but they were not punished. So I see it as a problem. It's far from perfect, but it's a permanent fight. And I do think that's really something to understand. But we're still in a bit like survival mode.
Yeah, because I guess that the government doesn't like many things that especially investigative journalists are doing, like some medias in Ukraine and announcing and really talking about problems all the time, especially in the army, in the defense ministry. Then it's a big challenge for you all guys.
Yes, but the problem is really, I think it's for everybody. And that's I always say, democracy is not where things are perfect. It's whether you can speak about the problem and address it. And we do have a lot. And I think that there is this thinking in Ukraine that, stealing from somewhere, it's betraying your country. That's really similar. Not doing something, running in the proper way, it's a life and death thing. So I think in this regard, we actually are enabled by the society as well to speak about the problems.
Let me talk, probably we are finishing, and it's very important to talk about the future. And we just have this peace summit in Switzerland weeks ago. Everyone is talking, what is the way for Ukraine, the peace negotiations, what is going to happen if Donald Trump is elected in the United States. How do you see this future? How in the journalist community you are confronting, covering, and assuming what is coming next in this stage of the war?
So first, very practical thing to say how we describe this, and I don't want to get too much into the geopolitics and the details, but if you really see this year of the war against Ukraine, we survived half of it, yes, pretty well. But now we're looking at this thing strategically, that there is this change in the Russian Ministry of Defense, and the guy who is put in charge is the one who is really, assigned to change the Russian economy.
He's
So
a
it's
Tartar
like,
himself,
yes,
no?
that this guy would be the ones who really need to organize the military economy. So they would be capable, to fight more, to produce more weapons. But if they are not very successful in the front line, maybe they won't have this benefit to really develop that. So we really need to stop that. And so far, it's working. Because Ukrainian, again, like if speaking about the military way, it's not really about it's not fictional. Ukraine needs to destroy Russian potential to wage this type of war against us. Very simple. So this type of war of this magnitude cannot happen. But that's, practical things. If you speak about human level, very important for us to take care about people who live in the occupation. We cannot sacrifice them. As our Nobel Peace Laureate Sasha Matvichuk said, the occupation is not what we are suggested and offered is the occupation. Occupation is not the peace. It's just a different way of fighting the war. That's one thing. Also, we know very well, if Russia puts, what would happen if Russian army laid down the guns? The war will be over. What would happen if the Ukrainian army stopped fighting? There would be more people killed. That's why it's very important to explain the motivation of the Ukrainians. But also, I want to say about what we appreciate. You said about Donald Trump. It's a luxury for us to be worried about something. The only thing we can do is to work hard and survive. And I also very much appreciate what we have. In this continent, but not like that, there are journalists in exile. I think there are some in this room. It's very painful to lose the country. My husband is a Russian journalist. I have a lot of friends from Russia, from Belarus. They lost their country. They lost their profession. They can do very little in exile, honestly. We can work. And we Ukrainians, if we would also be abandoned and would be forced to exile, something we don't want. To be honest, myself personally, I think I can live somewhere, I can receive the fellowship, I can even receive the same awards. But those awards would be given to us out of pity for us being a victim. So far, I think we are still fighting, and I really appreciate that. We managed to preserve the country. We managed to preserve the way of life. We still have, because it's possible. So it's really about future. And something to say sometimes, and I would allow myself to kind of almost finish with that here. Here, I hear a lot of like these suggestions about the peace talks. And I'm a person who followed the peace reconciliation process in the Donbass for 8 years. I know what it is, and I really supported it for many years. But in this particular case, you know, it feels like we are offered to be the sacrifice. But you know, we sacrificed Crimea, and this dragon doesn't stop. I allow myself at the Gabo Fest speak with metaphors. And it feels like people saying like, we want to peace everywhere. Can you sacrifice even more of yourself? Rationally, you can accept it. But if you are a sacrifice, you're just saying like, you know, I'm actually want to leave. I'll escape it, whatever happens. I'm not going to the kind of dragon's cave to be eaten and killed. So we would do as long as much to defend life of our people in any way possible and preserve the country. Ukrainians, for many, many, many years, didn't have own country. We were invaded. We were part of the empires. We were part of different authoritarian states and others. Now we have our own state, a democratic state, our own institutions. So I think for our generation, we cannot just fuck it up, you know, we just cannot, we have no right.
I want to start finishing this conversation about the human dimension. You start covering Maidan in 2014. You profile so many people. You told the story, and probably so many of them are not alive. Many of these people who were protesting in Maidan, and you also follow them to Donbass, fighting young people who took the arms and went to defend the country, they are not anymore. How has been for you as a personal, as a journalist, as a Nataliya, that every day wake up to follow this war and the human dimension and the pain dimension of this more than 10 years of war?
I cannot promise to myself it will be always like that, but I'm still the person who sees the best in the people. And I'm so inspired by all the people we meet. You know, because as I said, like today we're working more with the war crime survivors. And when you talk to them, I would think like this person survived the abduction in one of the region in Melitopol, left. But you know what what this family did after? They went to the town of Zaporizhia, and because it's very close to the front line, so there are no operational schools in there. But they opened like a private small school in the basement, which was it was a kindergarten. And now they came to Kiev when we talked, and they said like, and the next year we're opening the school. And you think like, they pursue, why I won't? So I think it's really really inspiring. To see where this strength is in people. And I think what is also important, and I think you all here understand that those who lose something, you know, those who lose something, they really appreciate what they lose. So we do appreciate life. We do appreciate peace. And I think we would hold on to that. But still, I don't want to finish on the negative note, because when I talk to these people, you know, what they speak about, and myself, it's not just, we always, also in journalism, we always speak here. We can lose our freedom. We can lose this. We can lose that. I'm looking at where we are and saying, we just have so much to defend. We have so much to protect. And these people have still so much to defend or protect. So we probably would think about that. And they give such an inspiration. If they can do that, I don't understand why I shouldn't.
Let's talk about something that is happening with Ukraine that is very interesting, that all you journalists, especially writers, and have been doing an amazing job, not just reporting, collecting stories, writing books, memories of what happened in the war, but also it's when you go to the bookshops now in Kiev or in Odessa or in many cities in Ukraine, Many of these books are totally in Ukrainian now. This is like, there is this big important issue for the new generation and for you all guys to say, we are Ukrainians and we want to protect our language and our books and our literature and our journalism. How could you explain a little bit about this process?
I'm cautious to speak about that
Mhm.
because I think for too many years, Ukraine was pushed to kind of identify people who speaking Russian and Ukrainian as if they are from different political views. However, there are a lot of different sociological research proving that language doesn't really represent always your political views. We all speaking here Spanish. It doesn't mean all the people, I don't know, like have a pro-Spanish or wherever, you know. I think here people should understand that language, we just inherited this language. But I think for us, it's also very important to preserve. I'm saying that we're living in very interesting time because, you know, but I explain it very simple. My sister is 5 years elder than me, and she grew up in the Soviet Union. In the time, in our town, there were there were 2 Ukrainian schools. In her school, the Ukrainian was not taught at all. That is the point. So, you know, now people just take this decision, and I think for a lot of, especially Ukrainian minorities, people of different like ethnic groups, it's also the part that, you know, it's a political language. It's like the Russian was the lingua franca for that empire, but we don't want to live in that empire. So there is a lingua franca for a particular state, which represent a lot of different people.
Bueno, ya vamos cerrando esta conversación. Muchísimas gracias a Nataliya Gumenyuk y vamos a una pausa. Muchas gracias.
Los invitamos a que no se retiren de la sala. Sigue Historias de una guerra.